That's not a salute. That's an apology. Nobody heard the old man say it. He said it under his breath, sitting in a white plastic folding chair in the front row of a Memorial Day ceremony at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with his hands folded across the crease of his trousers and his back so straight it made the chair look like it was leaning. His name was Leonard Mosley. He was 81 years old. And the thing he had just watched, a young lieutenant rendering the hand salute during the presentation of colours, had caused a reaction in his body that was involuntary, physical and immediate, the same way a pianist flinches when someone hits a wrong note in a concert hall. Nobody else noticed the error, but Leonard Mosley was not nobody else. And before this ceremony was over, a young officer's arm was going to shake. A colonel was going to cross an entire parade field on foot, and every person watching would learn that the distance between a correct salute and a wrong one is the distance between honouring the dead and pretending to. If that matters to you, type honour in the comments and stay with me. Leonard Mosley lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a brick complex off Gate 4 Road in Clarksville, Tennessee, 11 minutes from the Fort Campbell main gate. The apartment was on the 2nd floor, which meant stairs, and the stairs meant his left hip announced itself every morning with a deep percussive ache that started at the joint and radiated down to the knee like a slow drum roll. He took the stairs anyway. He had taken harder stairs. The apartment was spare in the way that a man's living space becomes spare when the objects in it have been curated by decades of elimination rather than accumulation. Everything present had earned its place, and nothing was decorative. A leather recliner that was 20 years old and shaped to his body. A small television he watched for weather and baseball. A kitchen table with 2 chairs, only one of which was ever used. On the wall above the table, in a plain black frame, hung a photograph that most visitors glanced at without understanding. It showed a line of soldiers in dress uniforms standing at attention on a parade ground, their alignment so precise that the photograph looked manipulated, as if someone had used a ruler to place each body. In the centre of the line stood a younger version of Leonard Mosley, taller then, thicker through the chest, his jaw set with the particular authority of a man who is not merely participating in the formation, but is the reason the formation exists. The photograph was dated 1987. The location was Fort Myer, Virginia, adjacent to Arlington National Cemetery. The unit was the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, the Army's oldest active duty infantry regiment, the unit responsible for conducting military funerals at Arlington, escorting the President and guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. And the man in the centre of the photograph, Sergeant Major Leonard D. Mosley, had been the regiment's senior enlisted advisor for drill and ceremony standards for 4 years, and before that had spent another 6 years at the US. Army Drill Sergeant Academy at Fort Jackson as the chief instructor for ceremonial procedures. 10 years. 10 years of teaching soldiers how to stand, how to march, how to carry a flag, how to fold a flag, how to hand a folded flag to a widow without letting your hands tremble, and how to salute. How to render the hand salute with the precision and reverence that the gesture demands. Because the salute is not a greeting, and not a formality, and not a reflex. The salute is a contract. It is the physical manifestation of the relationship between a soldier and the institution that soldier serves, and between that institution and the nation that created it. Leonard Mosley had spent a decade making sure that contract was honoured with the body's full attention, and he had corrected more salutes than he could count, from privates to generals, from barracks to burial grounds, with a consistency and an exactness that had earned him a reputation so specific that people in the ceremonial community still referred to the standard as the Mosley. But that was a long time ago. That was before the retirement, before the move to Clarksville, before the hip, before the mornings alone at the kitchen table with coffee and the weather and the photograph on the wall. That was before the Army decided, gradually and without announcement, that the old standards were close enough, that good enough was good enough, and that the difference between a correct salute and an almost correct salute was a distinction without a practical difference. Leonard disagreed. He had always disagreed, and today, sitting in a white plastic chair on a parade field at Fort Campbell, with the May sun warming the back of his neck and the sound of a bugle pulling something out of his chest that he could never quite name, he was about to disagree one more time. The ceremony was held on the main parade field, a flat rectangle of mowed grass bordered by red oak trees and flanked on the east side by the division headquarters building, a 2-story brick structure with a flagpole out front that flew the stars and stripes and the 101st Airborne Division's Screaming Eagle flag. The setup was standard, a reviewing stand with folding chairs for distinguished guests and Gold Star families, a speaker's podium with a microphone that would feed back twice during the event, and an open formation area for the honour detail and the colour guard. White folding chairs were arranged in rows on the grass for the general audience, and they were filled. 300 people, maybe more, a mixture of active duty soldiers in uniform, veterans in civilian clothes, families with children, and a handful of local politicians who appeared at military ceremonies the way certain birds appear at certain feeders, reliably and with minimal variation. The weather was clear, 81 degrees at 09:30, which meant it would be 90 by the time the ceremony concluded, which meant the soldiers in Class A uniform standing in formation would be cooked by noon, which Leonard knew from personal experience was not a metaphor. He had stood in formations in heat that would blister paint, in cold that would crack steel, in rain that fell sideways, and in wind that made the colours snap like gunfire. Yeah, and he had stood in every one of them correctly, because the weather was not the standard and the standard did not adjust for comfort. He had arrived early, as he always did, 8:15 for a 1000 ceremony, and taken a seat in the front row, far left, where he could see the formation area, the colour guard's approach route, and the reviewing stand without turning his head. He wore a dark suit, a white shirt, a black tie, and his shoes were polished to a depth of shine that reflected the sky. On his left lapel he wore a single pin, the Command Sergeant Major insignia, the 3-star wreath surrounding the eagle, the highest enlisted rank in the army, and nothing else. No unit pins, no campaign ribbons, no veteran's cap with embroidered patches, just the rank. Because the rank said everything, and Leonard Mosley had never been a man who said more than was necessary. What Leonard didn't know yet, what he wouldn't learn until after the ceremony, when a conversation would start that would end with his arm aching, and a colonel standing in front of him with an expression that looked like the man had seen a ghost, was that the honour detail commander, the young officer whose salute had made Leonard's jaw tighten, was about to receive the most important 15 minutes of instruction he would ever get, and he was going to receive it from a man whose name he should have learned before he ever put on the uniform. The ceremony began at 10:03, 3 minutes late, which Leonard noted because 3 minutes late is 3 minutes of disrespect to every person who arrived on time. And because a ceremony that starts late tells the audience that the organisers value their own schedule more than the occasion. The post-chaplain delivered the invocation. A brigadier general from the division spoke for 12 minutes about sacrifice, service, and the enduring bond between soldiers and the nation they protect. His speech was competent. It hit the expected notes. Leonard listened with the polite, unfocused attention of a man who has heard this speech, or its functional equivalent, several hundred times. Then came the wreath-laying, then the moment of silence, then the gun salute. 7 rifles, 3 volleys, 21 rounds total, executed crisply by an honour guard detail that Leonard judged to be adequate in their movements, but slightly rushed in their timing. The interval between volleys a half-second short of regulation, which compressed the solemnity of the sequence and turned what should have been 3 distinct statements into something that felt more like a single burst. Nobody else noticed. Leonard noticed. He noticed the way someone who has tuned 1,000 instruments notices a string that is 1/8 of a tone flat. Not wrong enough to ruin the piece, but wrong enough to change its meaning. Then came the presentation of the colours. The colour guard advanced from the staging area behind the reviewing stand. 4 soldiers, the national colour bearer, the organisational colour bearer, and 2 guards. Marching in step, the flags unfurled and moving in the breeze. The honour detail commander, a first lieutenant named Garrett Webb, stood at the front of the reviewing stand to receive the colours with a salute. He was 25 years old, lean, sharp in his dress uniform, with the confident posture of a young officer who has been told he's doing well and has no reason to doubt it. He called the colour guard to a halt. He turned to face the national colours, and he saluted. His hand came up in a motion that was brisk, practised, and, to 300 people watching from their chairs, perfectly fine. To Leonard Mosley it was not perfectly fine. The error was compound. The elbow was flared approximately 15 degrees past the plane of the body, which pulled the upper arm out of alignment with the shoulder and created a wing-like effect that broke the clean line from shoulder to fingertip. The wrist was cocked inward. rotating the palm slightly toward the face rather than keeping it flat and angled downward at 45 degrees. And the fingers were the worst part, were not sealed together in a straight line from index to pinky, but were slightly splayed, the middle and ring fingers separating by perhaps 2 millimeters, a gap so small it was invisible at distance but devastating up close, because it meant the hand was not a blade but a fan, and a fan is not a salute. Leonard's hands tightened on his thighs. His breathing didn't change, his face didn't change, but something inside him, something that lived in the same place where the bugle pulled its nameless thing, contracted with a force that was part discipline and part grief, because what he was watching was not just a bad salute. It was the end point of a chain of transmission failures that had turned the sharpest gesture in the military vocabulary into something approximate, something casual, something that had been passed from instructor to student to instructor again, with each generation losing a fraction of a degree until the thing being taught was no longer the thing it was supposed to be. And Leonard knew, he knew with the certainty of a man who had spent 10 years at the source, that if he didn't say something, the chain would continue, and the young officer would teach that salute to the soldiers under his command, who would teach it to theirs, and in another 20 years the hand salute would be nothing more than a vague upward motion, a hand waved near the head, emptied of everything it was supposed to contain. The ceremony ended at 11:07. The formation was dismissed. The crowd stood, stretched, milled toward the parking area or the reception tent where lemonade and cookies were being served by a family readiness group. Leonard did not go to the reception tent. He stood from his chair, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked across the parade field toward the staging area where the honour detail was breaking down. His hip protested. He walked through the protest the way he walked through everything, with a stride that was unhurried and non-negotiable, each step placed with the deliberateness of a man who had once marched in front of the President of the United States and the caskets of the nation's dead, and had learned that every step is a statement, whether anyone is watching or not. Lieutenant Garrett Webb was standing near the equipment trailer, his cover tucked under his arm, talking to the colour guard sergeant about the logistics of the afternoon reception detail. He was relaxed. The ceremony was over. It had gone well. No dropped colours, no missed cues, no one had passed out from the heat. He saw the old man approaching and registered him the way junior officers register unfamiliar older men at military events, with polite wariness, prepared for either a handshake and a war story, or a complaint about the parking. Lieutenant Webb? Leonard stopped 3 paces in front of him. Not 2, not 4, 3. The distance prescribed in FM 3-21.5 for addressing a superior or rendering a report, a distance Leonard's body chose without consulting his conscious mind. Webb turned. "Yes, sir? My name is Leonard Moseley. I'm a retired Command Sergeant Major. I watched your ceremony today." Webb's expression shifted slightly, the polite wariness recalibrating toward respectful attention at the mention of the rank. "Thank you for coming, Sergeant Major. I hope you enjoyed it." Leonard looked at him. His eyes moved over Webb's face with a directness that wasn't aggressive but also wasn't optional. The look of a man who is deciding whether to say a thing and has already decided to say it, but is choosing his entry point with the same precision he applied to everything else. "I have a question for you," Leonard said. "Who taught you that salute?" The question landed the way Leonard intended it to, not as an attack, but as an opening, a door pushed ajar. The kind of question that tells the person being asked that the asker already knows the answer and is giving them the chance to discover it themselves. Webb blinked. He didn't understand the question, which was itself the answer. "I'm sorry. What do you mean?" "The salute you rendered during the presentation of colours. Who taught it to you?" Webb's chin lifted slightly. "I learned the salute at OCS, Sergeant Major. Same as everyone." Leonard nodded. The slow, deliberate nod of a man cataloguing information. "That's what I was afraid of." Webb's colour guard sergeant, a staff sergeant named Pereira, was standing 3 feet away, and he had stopped pretending not to listen. 2 other soldiers from the detail were watching from the equipment trailer. The air had the particular charged stillness of a moment that everyone present recognises as significant, even if they don't yet know why. "Permission to show you something," Leonard said. It was phrased as a request. It was not a request. Webb recognised this. Whatever authority he held as an officer, the gold bar, the duty position, the ceremony he had just commanded, was being gently, firmly and completely superseded by something older and more specific, something that lived in the old man's posture and voice, and in the 3-pace distance he maintained without apparent effort. "Of course, Sergeant Major." Leonard unbuttoned his suit jacket. He squared his shoulders. He brought his feet together, not with a stamp, not with theatre, but with the quiet, mechanical click of heels meeting that sounded like a lock engaging. And then he saluted. The movement took approximately 1 second. His right hand came up in a single, continuous arc. Not a snap, not a jerk, but a controlled sweep that began at his side and ended at his right eyebrow with the fluidity of something that has been performed so many times it has become indistinguishable from breathing. The hand was a blade, fingers sealed, extended, joined so tightly that no light passed between them. The thumb was tucked along the index finger, not wrapped over it, not floating beneath it, but aligned, creating a single flat surface from fingertip to wrist. The wrist was straight, absolutely, uncompromisingly straight, the forearm and hand forming one unbroken plane. The palm was tilted downward at precisely 45 degrees, sustained, angled so that an observer standing in front of him would see the back of the hand, not the palm, not the fingers, just the clean knife-edge profile of a hand that had been turned into an instrument of respect. The upper arm was parallel to the ground. The elbow was in the plane of the body, not forward, not back, not flared, locked into the exact geometric position, where the arm became an extension of the shoulder, rather than an appendage hanging off it. The fingertips touched the outer edge of the right eyebrow, not the forehead, not the temple, the eyebrow, at the point where the brow met the hairline, with enough pressure to dimple the skin but not enough to push the head. Leonard held the salute for 3 seconds. Then he brought his hand down in a controlled drop. Not a slap to the thigh, not a casual release, but a mirror of the upward motion, the hand returning to his side along the same arc it had travelled, completing the gesture the way a sentence is completed by a period, with finality and without residue. Nobody spoke. Staff Sergeant Pereira, who had been in the army for 12 years and had rendered and received thousands of salutes, was staring at Leonard's hand the way a man stares at something he thought he knew and has just realised he didn't. Webb was standing very still. His face had not turned white. That would come later, but something behind his eyes had shifted. A recalibration. The look of a person who has just been shown the original of something they had only ever seen in copies. "Now you do it," Leonard said. Webb swallowed. He straightened. He brought his hand up. The salute was the same one he'd rendered during the ceremony, brisk, confident, and wrong in the same 3 ways. Leonard watched it the way a mechanic watches an engine misfire. "Stop," he said. "Hold it." Webb froze, his hand at his brow, his arm locked in position. Leonard stepped forward. Not into Webb's space. Leonard was precise about that, the way he was precise about everything, but close enough to reach out and with 2 fingers, adjust. He touched the underside of Webb's elbow and pressed it inward, into the plane of the body, collapsing the 15-degree flare. Webb felt his shoulder rotate, felt the alignment shift, felt something click into a position he hadn't known existed. "Feel that," Leonard said. "That's the plane. Your elbow lives there, nowhere else." He moved to the wrist. He placed his thumb on the back of Webb's hand and his fingers underneath, and he rotated the wrist outward, flattening the cock, straightening the forearm-to-hand line until it was a single surface. The palm faces down and out, 45 degrees, not toward your face. The salute is not for you. It's for the person you're saluting. They see the edge of your hand, not the flat. The edge is sharp, the flat is soft. You're not soft. He looked at Webb's fingers. "Close them." Webb pressed his fingers together. "Tighter." Webb pressed harder. "Tighter." There is no space between those fingers, not a millimetre. Your hand is a blade. You're not waving. You're not greeting. You're rendering a salute, and the salute says, "I acknowledge your authority, I accept my duty, and I am prepared to execute both with everything I have." 4 fingers sealed together say that. 4 fingers with gaps say nothing. Webb's arm was beginning to tremble. The isometric tension of holding a salute in the correct position, truly correct, every joint aligned, every muscle engaged, is significant, and it increases exponentially when the position is unfamiliar, because the body is recruiting muscle fibers it has never been asked to use in that configuration. Leonard saw the tremor. He didn't tell Webb to relax. He didn't tell him to drop his arm. He said, That tremor means you're doing it right. The muscles that hold a correct salute are not the same muscles that hold a wrong one. Your body is learning. Let it learn. Webb held the salute. His arm shook. His jaw tightened. Sweat appeared at his temples. Not from the heat, from the effort, from the focus, from the experience of being physically corrected by a man whose authority was so absolute and so quiet that it made rank irrelevant. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Leonard watched him with the patient, unblinking attention of a man who has stood at attention for hours in rain and sun and darkness, who has held his own salute until his arm burned and his vision blurred, and the only thing keeping his hand at his brow was the knowledge that the person he was saluting deserved better than a comfortable gesture. "Drop!" Webb dropped his arm. It fell to his side like something that had been cut free. He exhaled. He looked at Leonard. His face was flushed, and his eyes had the slightly wild clarity of someone who has just been through something they don't fully understand but know is important. And then Leonard said something that changed the colour of the day for everyone who heard it. "Do it again." Webb saluted again. It was better. The elbow was closer, the wrist was straighter, the fingers were tighter, but it wasn't right. Not yet. Leonard corrected again. Touch on the elbow, a rotation of the wrist, a press on the fingertips. Webb held it. 30 seconds. Trembling. Drop. Again. Better. The plane was there. The wrist was true. But the contact point was off. Fingertips touching the temple instead of the eyebrow. Leonard adjusted. Hold. Drop. Again. By the 5th repetition, Webb's arm was shaking before his hand reached his brow. By the 7th, the tremor had changed character. It was no longer the shake of unfamiliar effort, but the vibration of muscles encoding a new pattern. The body overwriting one program with another, replacing the approximation he had learned at OCS with the precision that Leonard Mosley had spent a decade teaching at Fort Myer and Fort Jackson and Arlington National Cemetery, where the salute was not a skill but a sacrament, because the people receiving it were in boxes, and the boxes were draped in flags, and the flags were folded by hands that Leonard had trained, and the salutes that sent those flags on their way were salutes that Leonard had shaped, one arm at a time, one soldier at a time, until the gesture was as close to perfect as a human body could make it. On the 8th repetition, Webb's salute was correct. Not adequate, not close enough, correct. Leonard saw it. He saw the plane, the line, the angle, the blade, the contact point, the stillness. He saw the salute he had taught to 1,000 soldiers, the salute that had been rendered at the gravesides of presidents and privates and everyone in between, the salute that was supposed to be passed down intact from generation to generation, like a language or a prayer. He saw it in a 25-year-old lieutenant's arm on a parade field in Kentucky, and for a moment, just a moment, the thing that the bugle pulled out of his chest had a name, and the name was continuity, and it meant that the chain was not broken. "That's it," Leonard said. "That's the salute." Webb held it. His arm didn't shake. His face was still. His eyes were locked forward, focused on something in the middle distance that wasn't a physical object but an understanding. The understanding that what he had been doing before was not wrong in the way that a mistake is wrong, but wrong in the way that a copy of a copy of a copy is wrong, each generation losing resolution until the image is unrecognizable, and that what Leonard had just given him was the original. "Drop," Leonard said. Webb dropped his arm. He stood for a moment. Then he said, "Sergeant Major, I've been in the Army for 3 years. Nobody has ever corrected my salute. Not at OCS, not at BOLC, not at my unit. Nobody." Leonard looked at him. "I know," he said. "That's the problem." They stood on the parade field for 15 minutes. The reception was happening without them. Lemonade was being poured, cookies were being eaten. People were shaking hands and taking photographs in front of the memorial wreath. None of that existed for Webb or Leonard or Staff Sergeant Pereira, who was standing 4 feet away practicing his own salute against the corrections he had just watched, his lips pressed together in concentration, his arm moving through the motion again and again with the methodical intensity of a man who has discovered that something he thought he owned was actually borrowed and poorly maintained. 15 minutes. Leonard spent every one of them on the salute, not just the hand position, but the approach, the timing, the pace of the arm's movement, the breathing. He taught Webb that the salute begins in the feet. Your heels ground you, your posture carries the energy up through the spine. The arm is the last thing that moves. If your feet are wrong, your salute is wrong. If your spine is wrong, your salute is wrong. The hand is the expression, the body is the instrument. He taught him about the drop. The return is not a release. It's a controlled movement. You brought your hand up with intention. You bring it down with intention. The salute doesn't end when your hand leaves your brow. It ends when your hand reaches your side and stops. That stop is the punctuation. Without it, the salute is an incomplete sentence. He taught him about the eyes. You look at what you're saluting. Not through it, not past it, at it. If it's a flag, you see the flag. If it's a casket, you see the casket. If it's a person, you see the person. The eyes carry the meaning, the hand carries the form. Together they carry the salute. Webb absorbed it. Not passively, actively, hungrily. With the appetite of a person who has been eating something bland and has just tasted something real. He asked questions that were good. Not defensive questions, not justifying questions, but questions that told Leonard the young officer understood that he had been operating with incomplete information and wanted the complete version. Sergeant Major, why wasn't this taught at OCS? Leonard considered the question. It was once. When I was running the drill instructor course at Jackson, every candidate who went through that school learned the salute the way I just taught it to you. The way it was taught to me by a sergeant major named Woodhouse in 1966, who learned it from a sergeant major named Creighton in 1948, who learned it from a first sergeant whose name I never knew, who served in the First World War, and who apparently rendered the salute with such precision that General Pershing commented on it during an inspection in France in 1918. That's the lineage. That's the chain of instruction. It's unbroken. Or it was, until the training was standardized and abbreviated and turned into a checklist item instead of a craft. What you learned at OCS was the checklist version. It gets the hand in the general vicinity of the head. It satisfies the requirement. But it doesn't carry the weight. He paused. The weight is what matters. The weight is what the families feel when they're sitting in those chairs at Arlington. And the only thing standing between them and the worst moment of their lives is a soldier whose salute says, "We remember, we honour, we grieve with you." That salute has to be perfect. Not good. Not adequate. Perfect. Because the person in that box gave everything, and the least we can give back is a gesture that means what it's supposed to mean. Webb was quiet for a long time after that. The colonel appeared without warning. He came from the direction of the headquarters building, walking across the parade field with the unhurried stride of a senior officer who's been watching something from a distance and has decided to close that distance. He was in his mid-50s, tall, with the weathered face of a man who had spent more time outside than behind a desk, and his dress uniform carried the accumulated weight of 30 years of service. Combat patch on the right shoulder, Ranger tab, a row of ribbons that started at the pocket and ended somewhere near the collarbone, where his name tag read Eichner. He stopped 10 feet from Leonard and Webb. He had been watching from the second-floor window of the headquarters building for the last 8 minutes. He had watched the old man demonstrate the salute. He had watched the lieutenant practice. He had watched the corrections, the adjustments, the repetitions, the trembling arm and the steady hand. And he had felt something that he hadn't felt in a very long time. The particular, unmistakable recognition of watching someone do something exactly right. "Sergeant Major Mosley," he said. Leonard turned. He looked at the colonel. He did not recognize him. "Sir," Eichner stepped closer. He was looking at Leonard with an expression that Webb would later describe to Staff Sergeant Pereira as, like the man had just found something he lost 30 years ago. "You don't remember me," Eichner said. "I don't, sir. I apologize." "Fort Myer, 1991. I was a second lieutenant fresh out of West Point assigned to the Old Guard. First week in the regiment, I reported to the ceremonial training section for salute and drill evaluation. The senior enlisted instructor, a sergeant major, stood me in front of a mirror and spent 45 minutes correcting my salute. He told me that West Point had taught me how to salute like a cadet, and he was going to teach me how to salute like a soldier. He adjusted my elbow, my wrist and my fingers, and he made me hold the position until my arm shook so hard I thought it was going to fall off. Then he told me to do it again." He paused. "That was you." Leonard looked at him. The recognition came slowly, not of the face, which had changed too much, but of the moment, which hadn't changed at all, because the moment was the same moment, reproduced across 34 years, a lieutenant standing on a parade field learning the salute from a man who had learned it, from a man who had learned it from a man who had served in France in 1918, and who had saluted with a precision that caught the eye of a general. The chain. The unbroken chain. "I remember the mirror," Leonard said. "I remember you were left-handed and kept trying to compensate on the approach. I told you the salute is a right-hand act and the left hand's job is to stay out of the way." Eichner smiled. It was not a casual smile. It was the smile of a man who has carried something with him for decades and has just been told that the person who gave it to him remembers giving it. "I haven't seen anyone correct a salute like that since 1974, Eichner said. Then he corrected himself. "No, since you corrected mine in 91. I've been watching from the window. You haven't lost a step, Sergeant Major." Leonard said nothing. His face was still, but his hands, which had been folded at his sides throughout the conversation, opened slightly, the fingers extending, the same fingers that had adjusted 10,000 elbows and 10,000 wrists and 10,000 sets of fingertips. And the opening of those hands was the only concession he made to the emotion that was moving through him, which was the emotion of a man who has given his life to a single thing and has just learned that the thing survived. Colonel Eichner stayed for 20 minutes. He stood on the parade field with Leonard and Webb and Staff Sergeant Pereira, who had stopped practicing his salute and was now standing at a respectful distance, listening with the focused attention of a man who is witnessing something he will tell his soldiers about for the rest of his career. And he talked about the salute the way Leonard talked about it, with precision and weight, and the understanding that what they were discussing was not a physical motion but a cultural artifact, a piece of living history transmitted through the hands of people who cared enough to get it right. Eichner told Webb about his first funeral at Arlington. He had been in the Old Guard for 3 months. The ceremony was for a World War II veteran, a private first class who had died at 94 in a nursing home in Silver Spring, Maryland, with no living family except a niece who flew in from Oregon. The casket team carried the flag-draped coffin to the gravesite. The chaplain spoke. The rifle detail fired 3 volleys. The bugler played taps, and Eichner, standing at the foot of the grave, rendered the salute. "I held it for the entire duration of taps," he said. "My arm was on fire by the second phrase, but I held it, and I held it correctly. Elbow in the plane, wrist straight, fingers sealed, eyes on the casket. Because Sergeant Major Mosley had taught me that the salute was not for me. It was for the man in the box, and the man in the box deserved a salute that was perfect, not a salute that was comfortable." He looked at Leonard. "I've carried that for 34 years. Every salute I've rendered since that day has been the one you taught me, and I've passed it on when I could. But it's not enough. It's never enough, because the instruction isn't systematic anymore, it's accidental. It depends on whether a young soldier is lucky enough to stand in front of someone who knows the difference." Leonard looked at the ground. He looked at the parade field, at the folding chairs being stacked by a detail of privates, at the memorial wreath sitting in the sun, at the flag on the headquarters building moving in a wind that had picked up since the ceremony ended. He looked at all of it with the expression of a man who is seeing 2 things at once, the present and the past, laid over each other like transparencies, the same parade field, the same flag, the same gesture, repeated and repeated and repeated across the decades by hands that learned it from hands that learned it from hands that first rendered it in a war that ended before any of them were born. "I want to ask you something, Sergeant Major," Eichner said. Leonard looked at him. "Go ahead, sir." "I'm the Deputy Garrison Commander. I have authority over the post-training programs, including ceremonial instruction. Currently, the drill and ceremony block for pre-deployment certification is 4 hours. The salute gets maybe 20 minutes in that block. What happened today, what I just watched you do with Lieutenant Webb, that's not something we have in our program. The detail, the lineage, the physical correction, we've lost it." He paused. "I want it back. Would you be willing to come on post and teach? Not a one-time thing. A regular session, monthly. For the honour detail, the colour guard, the funeral honours team, anyone who renders a salute in an official capacity." Leonard was quiet. The wind moved the flag. Somewhere across the parade field someone laughed. The bright, uncomplicated sound of a person at a reception who is not thinking about salutes or chains of instruction or the weight of a gesture rendered at a graveside. Leonard thought about his apartment, the leather recliner, the television, the kitchen table with 1 chair used and 1 chair empty, the photograph on the wall, the line of soldiers at Fort Myer, their alignment perfect, their salutes perfect, because he had made them perfect, because that was his job and his purpose and the thing he was put on the earth to do. He thought about the mornings, the coffee, the weather, the stairs that made his hip announce itself. He thought about what it would mean to take those stairs not just to go somewhere, but to go somewhere that mattered, to stand in front of soldiers again, to touch an elbow and say, "Feel that, that's the plane," to watch a young arm tremble and know that the tremor meant the body was learning, that the chain was being repaired one link at a time. "Yes, sir," he said, "I'll do it." Eichner extended his hand. Leonard took it. The handshake was firm, brief, and correct. 2 pumps, eye contact, release. The handshake of 2 men who understand that agreements between soldiers are not made with signatures, but with hands that mean what they offer. Webb drove Leonard to his truck after the field cleared. Leonard's Buick was parked in the visitor lot near Gate 4, a dark blue sedan with 86,000 miles and a registration sticker that was 2 months from expiring. Webb pulled his government vehicle alongside it and killed the engine. They sat for a moment. The parade field was visible through the windshield, empty now except for the wreath and the chairs and the flag, which was still moving. "Sergeant Major," Webb said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it." Leonard waited. "I've been commanding the honor detail for 6 months. I've done 4 ceremonies. I thought I was doing it well. I thought the salute was right. Not because I didn't care, but because nobody ever showed me that it wasn't. What you did today, it changed the way I understand my job. Not just the salute. The whole thing. The idea that every motion has a meaning, and that the meaning degrades if the motion degrades. I didn't know that. Now I do, and I won't forget it." Leonard looked at him. He looked at him the way he had looked at 1,000 young soldiers over the decades. The fresh faces, the earnest eyes, the willingness to learn that is the best and most perishable quality in any military organization. "You're a good officer, Lieutenant. You have good instincts. You stood on that field and practiced until your arm shook, and you didn't complain, and you didn't make excuses. That's rare. Most people, when they're corrected, spend their energy defending the mistake instead of fixing it. You fixed it. That tells me everything I need to know about you." He opened the car door and stepped out, his hip reminding him of its presence with a dull flare that he ignored the way he had ignored every physical complaint for 50 years. He leaned back into the car. "One more thing. The next time you salute a flag, or a casket, or a general, or a private, do it the way I showed you. And when you have lieutenants of your own, show them the way I showed you. Don't put it on a slide. Don't put it in a PowerPoint. Put your hand on their elbow and say, 'Feel that.' Because the salute is not a visual. It's a physical transmission. It goes from body to body, hand to hand, and that's the only way it survives." Webb nodded. He didn't trust himself to say more. Leonard closed the door, walked to his Buick and sat behind the wheel. He didn't start the engine immediately. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel, 10 and 2, because some habits are permanent, and looked through the windshield at Fort Campbell, at the buildings and the roads and the flag and the empty parade field where, an hour ago, he had watched a salute that was wrong and had made it right. He thought about Woodhouse, the sergeant major who had taught him in 1966. He thought about Creighton, who had taught Woodhouse in 1948. He thought about the unnamed first sergeant in France in 1918, whose salute had been so precise that a general stopped an inspection to comment on it. He thought about Eichner, who had carried the salute for 34 years. He thought about Webb. Who would carry it now? And he thought about the soldiers Webb would teach, and the soldiers those soldiers would teach, and the chain stretching forward into a future he would never see, carried by arms he would never touch, rendered at graves he would never visit for people whose names he would never know. The chain was not broken. It had bent. It had thinned. It had been copied so many times that the copies had lost the original's clarity. But it was not broken, because one old man had sat in a plastic chair and heard a wrong note and had refused to let it stand. Leonard started the engine. He drove the 11 minutes to his apartment. He took the stairs. His hip complained. He walked past it. He made his coffee. He sat at the kitchen table in the one chair that was always used. And he looked at the photograph on the wall, the line of soldiers at Fort Myer, their alignment perfect, their salutes hidden inside the stillness of the image but present, always present, in every hand and every arm and every set of sealed fingers. He drank his coffee. The evening light came through the window and turned the room the colour of something old and warm and still holding. If this story reminded you that the things that matter most are often the smallest, a hand position, an elbow angle, the space between four fingers, and that the people who keep those things alive do it not for recognition, but because letting them die would be a betrayal of everyone who came before, then subscribe to this channel. We tell these stories because the men and women who set the standard never lowered it, even when the world stopped noticing. Share this with someone who served. Drop a comment if you've ever been corrected by someone who cared enough to get it right. Hit that subscribe button. We'll see you in the next one.